Hello, good morning. Today our guest is Professor John Antonakis, or is it Antonakis? Which one?
Well, it depends on the language you're using. In French, it's Antonakis. In Greek, it's Andonakis. In English, it's Antonakis. In American, I've heard Antonakis. So
Okay, all right
whatever.
then. So Antonakis, it's American for me. Today we're going to be talking about intelligence and leadership. Professor John Antonakis, is intelligence crucial for organizational success?
So in general, one finding in industrial psychology that is probably not disputed by many psychologists is that general intelligence, the ability to learn, is strongly predictive of work performance, especially as the complexity and exigencies and demands of the job increase. So yes, it is a very, very strong predictor of work performance in general. It's a very strong predictor of managerial performance in general. It's also a pretty strong predictor of leadership performance.
And a relatively large percentage of Fortune 500 CEOs have exceptionally high IQs.
That is correct. I think the work of Jonathan Wai, has established that high-level leaders, CEOs in particular, are overrepresented in the extreme levels of the IQ stratum.
Great. And why is IQ correlated with success? I know the question seems obvious, and I've discussed IQ before on the show, but let's say for whatever reason, a random person who's unfamiliar with IQ research is listening to the show, a skeptic, for instance. So in your article with Professor Dean Simonton, you quoted Malcolm Gladwell, who he tends to discredit IQ a bit and is more likely to attribute success to luck or mere chance.
Well, I think Malcolm Gladwell is misguided, at least statistically speaking. I'll come back to what Gladwell said because we do address this point in our article. So modern definitions of intelligence usually come around the idea that intelligence is the ability to learn. So the way in which we measure it is an individual able to abstract, to discern patterns, to understand condition action links. So going through life and having more experiences suggests that if you have a better capacity to learn, you'll be able to understand how the world functions, and you can understand causal processes and condition action scripts in a better way than somebody who does not have this capacity. So to us, it's no wonder that somebody who has high intelligence is able to better join the dots, is better able to learn from experience. I need to also make very clear that intelligence and personality are orthogonal. So for every highly intelligent person you have who is extroverted, you may have a highly intelligent person who is not extroverted. So extroversion and intelligence or openness, emotional stability, conscientiousness, and agreeableness, these are orthogonal factors to general intelligence. So that's not to say that intelligence is the alpha and omega of everything that drives success in work settings or in leadership settings in particular. Intelligence matters very much. So does personality. Also, does the person have appropriate domain level expertise? So that's one thing I want to make clear. Second thing, the article in which we wrote about perceptions of effectiveness as a function of intelligence is a completely different discussion as compared to objective effectiveness. So if we measure effectiveness objectively, in other words, the performance of a company, the effect of intelligence with that criterion is always positive and monotonic. In other words, it increases, it's generally linear, and perhaps there's a slight diminishing marginal utility. However, insofar as perceptions of leadership are concerned, perceptions of others, that can be a different discussion. And what we found is if a leader is a certain level more intelligent than his or her followers, there will be better better able to lead them. They have better insights. They find solutions to problems. That can better keep rivals at bay. So a leader must necessarily be more intelligent than the average intelligence of the group he or she leads. But if they are too intelligent, then perhaps the individuals might not identify with them. They might not understand them. They might not, follow them. It's more like a kind of Sheldon type from Big Bang Theory who's leading. So we made it very clear in our paper that we were talking about perceptions on the y-axis of effectiveness as a function of general intelligence. And what we find is a curvilinear relationship where the peak is at about 120 IQ points. Now, coincidentally, Malcolm Gladwell, in his book Outliers, suggested that after 120 IQ points, there's not much that's added in the predictive power of leadership insofar as effectiveness is concerned. But that is simply not true, because that's not what the data show when we measure objective performance. So there still are gains to be made. Perhaps those gains are less and less and less. In other words, there's a marginal diminishing utility. But that doesn't mean if I have somebody who is at 140 and he's leading a company that develops vaccines, or molecular biology company focused on producing molecules, or some material composites company, someone who understands the ropes of the business, who has a lot of domain relative expertise, and is smarter than somebody else would have been leading that company. They will certainly gain some benefit from leading. I mean, I cannot imagine someone with an IQ of 120, which is about the average IQ level of a university graduate, would be smarter than someone, I don't know, with an IQ of say 140, 150, having a PhD in material science and leading scientists who develop, different kinds of materials. So I think one needs to temper Gladwell's arguments, because they were not very specific to the particular problem at hand. That is, that increasing intelligence is, in general, is useful from an objective perspective. The research that I did looked at perceptions, which is a completely different criterion, and perceptions of effectiveness and actual effectiveness don't necessarily concord at high levels.
All right, excellent response. And the 10,000 hour rule, that has also been debunked by psychological studies, and that's being carried. The 10,000.
Can you repeat that again?
So Malcolm Gladwell also wrote about the 10,000 hour rule. Yes, and that has also been widely debunked by psychologists and the media. I
agree on that. Yes.
No amount of practice will make you a Newton.
Absolutely. I mean, you can take, again, ability, unfortunately, is randomly distributed by nature. It depends, on the genes you receive from your mother and your father, how they combine, and of course, the environment. Now, holding the environment constant, I mean, if somebody is not that smart as measured, say, by a test of intelligence, working memory capacity, what have you, we can train them 10,000 hours in chess or 20,000 hours in chess. There is no way that they will become a grandmaster in chess. Whereas somebody else who has an innate ability to learn very quickly, even maybe with a couple of thousand of hours of chess, will reach very rapidly an expert level, which is what we observe. In music, people can compose, very complex pieces at an extremely young age with very little experience. We have grandmasters who are very smart in chess, or mathematical whizzes. So it is possible to achieve a high level of success with very little hours, and it's oftentimes impossible to become an expert, no matter how many hours of experience you have, simply because you don't have a good innate capacity to learn.
Yes, there's a word, and I have been using it quite frequently: incorrigible. It refers to the incapacity of some people to learn. And John, I'm completely,
May I add something to that
of
point?
course, of course.
Sorry, Lipton, a small point. And there's just one thing in English we say that experience, is the best teacher. Not necessarily. It depends on the task structures. Can we get feedback? Can we learn from the task that we're doing? And number two, it depends on the individual. And in fact, that quotation is a misquotation of Benjamin Franklin, who said something like, "Experience is a dear teacher." Because it really depends on the individual, and also it depends on the task structures. And there's an excellent work also done by a psychologist called Chanteau, who shows that in some domains, we can learn because we get feedback really quickly, and we can abstract and understand condition action links. In other domains, it's very hard to learn because we don't get immediate feedback. So it also depends on the domain.
Yes, but before we talk about some people and institutions being incorrigible, we're going to mention Sheldon Cooper. So Sheldon Cooper, in that series, The Big Bang, his IQ is quite high, maybe well over 168. Intelligent people are able to diffuse a tense situation, and even if they're not innately socially adept, outwardly they are socially adept. Sheldon Cooper is extremely socially inept, and some have argued that a character like Sheldon Cooper in the real world would not have been as successful due to his low level of social intelligence. So when you're dealing with, let's say, a customer or an incompetent employee, one must appreciate that during that period, the customer or the incompetent employee has power. So if you irritate the incompetent employee, you may not get a benefit. If you are rude to the silly customer, the customer could walk away. So intelligent people know how to manipulate such situations. So Sheldon Cooper, what do you think about him? Would you describe Sheldon Cooper as intelligent? Are highly intelligent people really like Sheldon Cooper?
Well, I think that's a highly exceptional example. As I mentioned before, very, very large scale studies show that general intelligence and personality are orthogonal. In other words, there's no correlation between a person's social skills and how agreeable and empathic they are, how emotionally stable they are. All these things are part of the domain of personality. So, there are many very smart people who have exceptionally good social skills. I don't know, take Barack Obama, very, very smart person. Bill Clinton, another one comes to mind, or, many leaders, Jacinda Ardern of the Prime Minister of New
New
Zealand.
Zealand.
Yeah. So there are many cases of individuals who are janitors and who do very manual tasks who have equally bad social skills as does Sheldon Cooper. So it's just that it's unfortunate that we have very salient examples when we see that. Daniel Goleman, who is a best-selling author, and he wrote a lot about what he calls emotional intelligence, which is a very problematic construct.
It is.
And we can get into a discussion
We're
on that
going
later.
to get into it.
Yeah, he used an example. We said, we all know, very smart people who have bad social skills. Yeah, I know many very smart people who have bad social skills, but I also know people who are not so smart who have bad social skills. It's just so easy to imagine, the scientist who has really bad social skills. And we fall biased to what Daniel Kahneman and Amos Tversky called the availability heuristic. It's very easy to imagine people like that, and because we imagine easily that case and we see these as very salient, then we that biases our any probabilistic statement we may make about what this individual does in certain situations. So yeah, we kind of forget all the people who are not smart who also have really bad social skills, and that's equally distributed across the IQ strata.
And I creatively employed the word manipulating. So intelligent people know how to manipulate situations. Highly intelligent people have a high EQ because they know how to get what they want. EQ is a consequence of IQ. EQ is not independent of IQ. People are acting like EQ is a variable that's separate from IQ. Not true. If you're highly intelligent, you think long term, and as such, you're going to know how to manipulate the situation to get the appropriate outcome.
Well, I mostly agree with what you're saying, but I disagree on two things.
All right.
I don't like to use the word manipulate. If I handle a situation and I do what's morally correct, and what's good for everyone and what's good for the greater good, I wouldn't call that manipulation. Manipulation, I would call, if I make someone do something that's not in their interest, then I'm manipulating them. So, if a leader uses their power to serve the public good and to do what's morally right, I think, that's the moral duty of a leader. I do understand that the word manipulate is, to use one's power and through the result of one's effort to get something done. But I think it's got negative connotations. So I would hate to use the word manipulate. I would rather use the word, say, manage. Secondly, I agree with you that EQ, if it does exist, does depend to a large extent on general intelligence. However, I have done several papers where we show that depending on what measure of emotional intelligence you have, it may more or less correlate with IQ or with personality. So, for example, the ability emotional intelligence tests that are done coming out of Yale University with Peter Salovey at the helm correlate quite strongly, in fact, very strongly, with general intelligence and some aspects of personality. Other kinds of emotional intelligence tests, those by Baron or by Goldman or by Wong and Law, those overlap very, very strongly with personality. So if we do a horse race and we try to predict a criterion and we have emotional intelligence in there, emotional intelligence does nothing if we account for the effects of general intelligence and personality. So that's why I have a bit of a bone to pick with people who, have latched on this idea of emotional intelligence. Personality has been around and we've been studying it for, many, many decades. So have we been studying intelligence for many decades. When people come out and say, Eureka, I've discovered something new. Well, is it really new? Is it old wine in new bottles? So insofar as emotional intelligence is concerned, there's nothing really new in there. And in general, what effects are already accounted for by general intelligence and personality subsume any predictive power that emotional intelligence has, which suggests that it really shouldn't be used for diagnostic purposes and nor for consulting and training.
Yes, quite diplomatic. I am not as diplomatic yet. I am using the word yet. I am not that diplomatic yet, but exactly, you're quite diplomatic. Remember, I'm a layman, but I'm a serious layman. And at one point, I shared some dubious views, but because of education and exposure, I no longer subscribe to these dubious views because I am not incorrigible. People must learn. You must be teachable. No,
That's true.
I don't like it when individuals refuse to learn. So if I make an error, just say, Lipton, this is erroneous, change it. You must be teachable. And sometimes people are not teachable, like charisma. We're talking about personality. Charisma is a personality trait. So people who are charismatic, are they also likely to have a high EQ?
Well, I've been studying charisma for the last few years, and the way I define charisma is a kind of stylistic expression of transmission of information. So being charismatic, it depends on how smart you are, because it requires quite refined rhetorical skills. And it depends on whether also you've learned how to produce a rhetoric in a way that triggers a visual and triggers symbolic meanings. In research that we're doing now, we haven't published this yet. We don't find a strong relationship between the ability to produce charismatic rhetoric and personality. We find a stronger relationship with general intelligence. So smarter people are better able to produce rhetoric that triggers a visual. So in other words, able to tell a good story or use metaphor. So that's one aspect of charisma. We define charisma as value-based, symbolic and emotion-laden leader signaling. So signaling is about communicating information to a receiver. And what's essential in charismatic leadership is that you're able to speak in pictures, which requires really good verbal skills. That you signal your values and your beliefs, which requires having confidence and conviction in the moral righteousness of your arguments, and then also exhibiting passion and some emotional engagement in what you're doing. So it depends on a combination of factors. I'm not sure whether to put charisma in the domain of personality. I see charisma more as a skill, as an acquired skill that depends on one's ability to learn again, and whether they have been exposed to either good role models who they've learned from, or they've been trained in the art of rhetoric, like they used to do in ancient Greece. And I encourage listeners to perhaps look at some of the work of Aristotle on the rhetoric and the poetics, where he made very clear that leaders should learn the art of leadership, which is about moral character, the ethos, the pathos and passion and logos, reasoned argument. And he said, if you aren't unable to move people through the art of leadership, you need to use what he called contracts and torture, in other words, carrots and sticks. But they believed in ancient Greece that these were trainable, a trainable skill, and that's why they used to take young people and train them to be politicians in the art of rhetoric. So I think in the same vein, and this is what I've been working on in the last few years, I do find that smarter people are better able to produce charismatic rhetoric. Of course, it depends also on experience and if one has learned from it. So I would refer to it more as an acquired skill.
I agree. Some time ago I was having a conversation and we commented that charisma can be taught. So I agree. John, can personality compensate for low IQ or lower IQ? Recently, you were cited by CNBC. Top psychologist says that IQ is important, and I read that piece.
Yeah. Well, I think to some extent that it can. I mean, but it depends on the job complexity. If the demands, the cognitive demands of the job are extremely high, I don't think any amount of personality can compensate for that. If the exigencies of the situation are not, that high cognitively, I think then yes, personality can certainly help. Being conscientious and meticulous and precise, I think can help you do a better job in certain domains. It really depends on what the criterion is. If social skills are important, listening to customers, empathizing, receiving customer complaints, I think being conscientious, being open-minded, and understanding other person's point of view and agreeable, I think certainly would help, if one was slightly less smart than somebody else, if we had to compare. So yeah, to some extent, I think it can, but no matter how meticulous you are and open-minded you are, if you're not that smart and don't understand chemistry, there's no way personality is gonna, turn you into a Nobel-winning chemist.
Exactly, and it is not only important for you to be smart, but you must appreciate chemistry. And if you're smart and interested in chemistry, you're going to appreciate it. So some people are able to get a B or even a master's in chemistry, but when it comes to the intellectual side of chemistry, they serve no purpose. And I've met many people like that. They have a master's, a PhD, they have every single degree. But if you say to them, who was John Knox or who's John Locke, they just stutter. They have no interest in even the intellectual content of your own profession. I've met people like that.
Yeah. I mean, but that's got to do with general reading and general culture. I mean, it's possible someone is highly specialized in chemistry and is good in that, but
Yes.
knows nothing
Yeah,
about
that
music or
yes.
philosophy or. But I think that's more going to do with personality in that sense. If someone is open-minded and likes to learn about other domains and areas, I think that's okay too. I would have a hard time believing somebody who's not reasonably smart would get a master's degree in chemistry. That would be
Yeah.
really really unusual. But just to go back to your previous question, I mean, no matter how motivated somebody is, I mean, if they have a fundamental difficulty in understanding, very advanced concepts and abstract notions, they would have a hard time getting a master's degree in chemistry. So, not anyone can go and get a master's degree in chemistry, just like not anybody can become a concert violinist, no matter how much they practice and how motivated they are.
All right. And back to our question on leadership. Can too much intelligence be bad for a leader?
Only insofar as perceptions of other people are concerned, and if the gap of IQ is just way too high between the leader and those who he or she is leading, and if the person is unable to speak to the masses in ways that they can understand. So let me give you some examples. So, suppose you have a Sheldon type person. If that Sheldon type person is leading physicists who are also super smart around the IQ of Sheldon, that's fine. There won't be any problem there. But if that Sheldon is leading, people down in the trenches who are assembling, basic machinery and working in a factory line, they won't understand him. So there's a big problem over there. Let's take another case. Let's take Martin Luther King. Martin Luther King was a very, very smart man. He had a PhD in religious science or studies, I think, or in divinity. I'm not sure exactly, but he had a doctorate. You can infer his intelligence also by his vocabulary and how he spoke. Exceptionally smart person. Yet, when he gave speeches, he could speak to the common man and the common woman as easily as he could to very smart people. So, one of the greatest speeches ever given in the history of humankind is Martin Luther King's speech at the gates of Lincoln Memorial. And one thing that I mentioned, and I think it was picked up in Newsweek a few years ago, is if one is smart and if one is able to use charismatic rhetoric by explaining very complex things using metaphor, no matter how smart one is able to be understood. So, Martin Luther King said something like, in a sense, we've come to the nation's capital to cash a check. When the architects of our republic signed the magnificent words of the Constitution, he was talking about what rights all the citizens of America had, but he said, insofar as the black people are concerned, we have received a bad check, a check marked insufficient funds. And then he went on to say, we refuse to believe the Bank of Justice is bankrupt and that there are insufficient funds of justice in the great vaults of our nation, or something like that. Now, he could have used legal arguments. He could have quoted the Constitution and he could have spoken, in academic mumbo-jumbo legalistic speak, but he did not. He said the architects gave out promissory notes to all the citizens. The white people, they go to the Bank of Justice with their check and they get their money or their justice. I'm sorry, black people, we don't. We get a check marked insufficient funds. That's unfair. Everyone understood what he said. Whether you had a degree or not, whether you had finished high school or not, you understood it because he took very complex abstract notions and he made them very tangible by using metaphors that made a lot of sense. Einstein, who was one of the smartest people ever to walk on this planet, at the time he wrote his theories, very, very, very few people, even physicists, were unable to follow some of his arguments because the mathematics was so complex. So he developed a series of what he called thought experiments, to explain how gravity and acceleration is the same thing, by the thought experiment of being in a lift in space where the lift suddenly accelerates and then you hit the floor and then you're able to walk and you're experiencing gravity. In fact, you're not. You're experiencing the floor of the lift hitting your feet, and because it's accelerating, you're able to walk on the lift even though there's no gravitational force on you. He used a lot of metaphor to explain highly complex things in ways that a common person can understand. So if a person is smart and if a person takes the effort to think about abstract notions and communicate them in metaphorical ways or using stories, then there will be absolutely no problem in terms of having higher IQ. So you won't have any problem with how you're seen. problem is if they're not good communicators, and sometimes smart people are not good communicators, and you know, that's why I've been pleading a lot more for, you know, leadership training and learning charisma. That's what I teach on our EMBA program, because it's really important that we learn to communicate in effective ways.
Again, you are. I would describe you as an eloquent speaker. Many academics are brilliant writers, but they're not the best speakers.
Well, thank you.
Yes, yeah. I like clear speakers and writers, but now I'm going to talk about incorrigible people. Some time ago, John, the Chinese in Jamaica started a pro-business organization to represent the interests of the Chinese. The Chinese built the retail sector in Jamaica, and they have been in the country for over 100 years. We have Jamaica has a really good relationship with China. After the Chinese built the institution, it evoked some rather visceral emotions because people said that it raised problems related to neocolonialism, etc. But my point is simple. I'm not a fan of the authoritarian Chinese model. I'm a libertarian, but the Chinese have managed to produce quality growth and lift people out of poverty. Although in rural China, there are still poor people. Therefore, if the Chinese have done so well in entrepreneurship, they respect Jamaica and they're willing to do business with Jamaicans, then business people in Jamaica should partner with the Chinese to start a business association in China. The Chinese are our friends, so we should learn. And by complaining, it means you're incorrigible. You have to learn. So this may sound a bit distant from our conversation, but when I'm talking about complex issues, I like to give examples. People must learn, John. If you're my friend and you're rich, you're a millionaire, and I am broke, when you do well, I should do well because they're going to teach me. So the Chinese are in Jamaica, and Jamaican businessmen and intellectuals are cursing the Chinese for starting a pro-business organization in Jamaica when the Chinese have been our friend. It means that we're incorrigible. As my friend, she's a consultant, usually argue, and a diplomat said they export to Jamaica and they don't want to get empty containers from Jamaica. We should learn. So things like that just really annoy me.
Well, having Greek roots, and the word diplomat, diplomatis, means to have your eyes double. I'm going to be diplomatic and say, look, I don't know much about the topic, so I shan't make
Okay.
any comments.
Yeah, that's me. Yes, but it's just been encouraged. Now back to leadership. The Prime Minister of Jamaica today, Andrew Holness, is fairly eloquent and patient. I think he has immense patience because for all the time when he speaks, he has to clarify what he said earlier to be more tactful. So he made a point about an agency, not being a charity. And if you're in the business of managing people's money, you have to make a profit. It's a business, it's not a social enterprise. There's a difference. So he said that there's a housing aid. And again, you don't have to comment because they're diplomatic. He said that the housing agency is not a charity, and it isn't. It was established to provide homes for contributors. Some people got upset because it went into commercial housing, but going to commercial housing doesn't prevent it from providing houses for contributors. And if it was created to provide houses for contributors, why is it investing in social housing? That is contrary to its mandate. So the Prime Minister, as usual, being a patient and articulate person, had to clarify himself. And I'm easily annoyed. So he's an example of a highly intelligent person who is leading people who may not be academically inclined. And no, I am being tactful.
Okay. All right. Well, again, I can't comment on this. I don't know anything about it. So, yeah, if there are any other issues about the leadership theory that I'm aware of, I'm happy to answer.
What personality is best correlated with leadership?
Personality traits.
Yes.
Well, extroversion is positively correlated. Conscientiousness, Open-mindedness, these are all positively correlated. Emotional stability is negatively correlated. And then agreeableness, aspects of it, the being honest and frank, are also positively correlated with leadership. So, you know, they do help to increase the predictive power of models. So yeah, personality also matters.
All right, so John, we're wrapping up. Last point. Do you teach people how to be diplomatic?
Not really. I teach them how to explain their point in a way that it makes it more easy for the other person to understand. One thing that perhaps I'm also guilty of sometimes is, you know, if I'm trying to convince somebody, I might attack them as a person instead of, you know, their argument. So I try to also get the point across, and I need to improve a bit more myself on this aspect. Is if you're trying to convince someone who has a fundamentally different point of view from yours, don't attack their identity. Don't make them feel bad about themselves. You know, maybe appeal to some general values that overlap with yours, and try to use logic to convince them. But I try to be diplomatic. I guess when I write, I'm a bit more direct. Yeah,
Well,
I
for
think it's
me,
important to be to a certain extent, but, you know, not to compromise the message. I would rather be more direct than diplomatic.
well, for me, I am logical. So when I'm speaking to people, let's say you make a point and I don't agree, I literally only talk about the idea, and that still irritates some people. Yeah, because for me, it's like you're literally like a XY verb. Like, I don't think about the person any at all. So if I'm responding to a paper written by John, I will mention the title and your name, and that's it.
Yeah.
And for some people, that can be a bit cold. It infuriates them.
Yeah, it's like they say in football, play the man, or play the player, not the play the ball, not the player.
All right. So this has been an excellent conversation, John, but unfortunately we have to wrap up. But thanks again for coming on.
Thank you,
It was
Lipton.
worth it getting up at like 4 a.m. Jamaica time.
Thank you so much. It's midday Swiss time, so I've already had my lunch. I guess you're looking forward to your cup of coffee. So
Yeah,
all the
and
best.
to
And
shower and all those stuff. I just brushed my teeth and went downstairs, but yes, to get ready for work and stuff. All
okay,
right,
thank you so
bye.
much, Lipton, for the invitation. Bye bye.